Now that Brandon Graham has called it a career after 15 incredible seasons with the Philadelphia Eagles, where does he stack all time on the defensive line in franchise history? All that and more coming your way right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louis DiBiase. Welcome into this Thursday edition of the show. We are continuing GOAT Week today on the podcast, talking about the greatest of all time at the defensive end position and the defensive tackle position. We'll rank our top 5 edge rushers in Eagles history and our top 5 defensive tackles, which I'm not going to lie, that position specifically, and we'll get into the defensive tackle on the second segment of the show, that was a lot more difficult than I originally anticipated. The DT history in Eagles lore is not incredible, whereas the edge rusher position, that one was difficult based on how many options I had. So we're going to rank the top 5 players at each defensive line position on today's edition of the show, and then some OTA takeaways. The Eagles have had 3 practices at the NovaCare complex for OTAs. Some interesting decisions Vic Fangio made on the early depth chart in the secondary, so we'll get into that coming up next on this edition of Locked On Eagles. But let's start GOAT Week today with defense. We completed our offensive series earlier this week with quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, and the offensive line. You can check those shows out on YouTube or any podcast platform. We'll start defense today with the defensive line. And Brandon Graham is the interesting part of this list because he doesn't have the stats of a Reggie White or a Trent Cole, but he does have 15 incredible years with the Eagles. He has played more games than any Eagle ever. He passed Chuck Bednark's record in 2025. Cool enough, that was the game I was at against the Cleveland Browns. Really special to be at that game, to see that moment. BG is an all-time Eagle. Like, he is the most Philadelphia Eagle player of all time. When you talk about like who the Eagles are in the form of an actual player, it's him and it's Brian Dawkins. So for me, Brandon Graham, who also won 2 Super Bowls with this football team, he is third all-time in franchise history in sacks, behind Reggie White and behind Trent Cole. Despite not having more than 1 double-digit sack season, he does have that stat to back it up. Consistently a top-tier edge rusher in pretty much every efficiency metric. PFF loved him for years. With all of that combined, plus the just generational leader he was, I think one of the best trash talkers in the history of the NFL, he'll probably get his number 55 retired at Lincoln Financial Field. All that being said, Brandon Graham, to me, I would say is top 3 all time with edge rushers, but I wouldn't say he's the GOAT. So I actually have him number 2. But the greatest Eagles edge rusher of all time, and again, I never got to see this player play. I think sometimes we become prisoners of the moment when discussing the history of the NFL and legacies, stacking up one player against the other if they were in different generations. In every sport, we kind of lean towards the present because it's what we know right now, especially if you're somebody that's a younger sports fan and you didn't watch those players play. You lean towards what you know. But I put PG number 2 because Reggie White, you could make the argument, isn't only the GOAT for the Eagles on the defensive line, but Reggie White, you could also say, is the best pass rusher in NFL history. There was one point where he had the most sacks in the history of the NFL. Now, Bruce Smith eventually caught up to him, but for a while, Reggie White was the all-time sack king. And when you look at his numbers, what he was doing at the time, when there were even less games, it's an all-time player. A first ballot Hall of Famer that's one of the greatest of all time doing what he did. Reggie White, just look at some of these statistics. He has the most sacks in franchise history by a lot, at 124 sacks. The next best guy is Trent Cole, who didn't even have 90. So Reggie White almost has 35 to 40 more sacks than the second place pass rusher in Eagles history, which is Trent Cole. In his first 8 seasons with the Eagles, and actually in all 8 seasons with Philadelphia before he went to Green Bay, he had at least 10 sacks. He is now second all-time in sacks in NFL history, only behind Bruce Smith. And I think the stat that actually blows my mind the most when discussing the Minister of Defense is his 1987 season. This guy set the single season record for most sacks in a season with 21 in just 12 games. That guy had 21 sacks in 12 games, 5 less games than the NFL plays in the modern day era. 21. That is one of the most mind-blowing stats in the history of football. Let me say it one more time, 21 sacks in 12 games. I mean, that's just, to me, complete banana land. So I think Reggie White is definitely the GOAT. He's number 1, but I am putting Brandon Graham number 2, and that is easy for me. Again, he is the most Eagle of all time. Just what it means to be a Philadelphia Eagle. He's played more games than anybody in the Midnight Green and the Kelly Green. 15 incredible years with this football team. 2 Super Bowl rings. I didn't even mention he made the biggest play in franchise history, the strip sack on Tom Brady to win the Eagles their first ever championship in Super Bowl 52. Number 55 is getting retired. Like, it's absolutely a given that it's going up in the rafters of the link. And I know, again, he only had 1 double-digit sack season, but sacks aren't the end-all be-all for pass rushers. And he had a lot of seasons where he had 7, 8, 9 sacks. Plus, when you look at his pass rush win rate, his pass rushing grades from, advanced statistical platforms like Pro Football Focus, he was always among the best of the best. And he was versatile. He could play inside and out. BG to me is number 2 behind Reggie White. And then how I'd round out the list of the top 5, Trent Cole number 3. I think Trent Cole is, outside of Reggie White, he's the second best Eagle ever from a pure sack standpoint. When it comes to registering sacks, finishing plays, getting to the quarterback, he's number 2, and of course the stats back that up as well. Second most sacks in Eagles history. I'd put Clyde Simmons number 4, and then I'd put Hugh Douglas number 5. Clyde Simmons is actually extremely underrated because he's kind of the Devontae Smith of the 90s for defense. You know how, like, Devontae Smith right now, if he was on another team, I think he could put up the numbers of an A.J. Brown, of a Justin Jefferson. But because he is across from potentially another all-time great player at his position, and A.J. Brown a receiver, Devontae Smith goes a little bit under the radar. I think Clyde Simmons, because he was playing across from Reggie White, is a little bit under the radar. But Clyde Simmons himself had some ridiculous seasons in Philadelphia. Let me pull up these sack totals just for Simmons in the 90s. So let's see here. He had 15 and a half. So 1988 to 1992, it was a really impressive run. 8 sacks, then 15 and a half, 7 and a half, 13. He himself had a 19 sack season in 1992. 5 sacks in 93, went on to Arizona, had an 11 sack season, in Jacksonville, 7.5, 8.5, 5, and 7. Like, this guy was consistent everywhere he went for 14 years, played from 1986 to 2000. Clyde Simmons is, to me, number 4. And then I'll put Hugh Douglas number 5. 9th all-time in sacks in franchise history. He was a staple of those 4 NFC title runs, that elite defense of the early 2000s. You had Javon Curse in 2004, but Hugh Douglas played from 1998 to 2004. For those 6 years, in 4 NFC title runs, he was your most consistent edge rusher. So I'll put Hugh Douglas number 5. That's how I'd round out the top 5 edge rushers in franchise history. Reggie White 1, Brandon Graham 2, Trent Cole number 3, Clyde Simmons number 4, and then Hugh Douglas number 5. And there were a lot of other guys that I went back and forth with. You know who was an interesting player that actually I didn't think I was going to consider for this list, but I did, was, believe it or not, Josh Sweat. Josh Sweat, it feels like he was only here for a few years. I feel old saying this, but Josh Sweat played in Philadelphia for 7 years. He's 11th all-time in franchise history in sacks. He, outside of Jalen Hurts, was the best player in your Super Bowl 59 victory. Almost, if Jalen doesn't have that touchdown to Devontae Smith in the second half of the game, I actually believe Josh Sweat wins Super Bowl MVP. So that could have been potentially a Super Bowl MVP that you drafted, played for 7 years, top 11 in sacks all time, he led your team in sacks in 2024 in your championship season. Josh Sweat, I actually considered in that 5th spot, but Hugh Douglas was 9th all time. I think he had some better years than Josh Sweat. 4 NFC title runs. He was a staple on that defense. So it was kind of a toss-up. I was really surprised, though, that I actually did consider Josh Sweat, but looking at it now, it actually makes sense based on his resume. All right, let's get into defensive tackle coming up next. We'll rank our top 5 DTs. Who's the GOAT on the interior? Does Jalen Carter belong on this list yet, despite only being in Philly for 2 years? We'll get into that coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing. The Oklahoma City Thunder, they have punched their ticket to the NBA Finals. We'll see if the Indiana Pacers can do the same tonight, up 3-1 against the New York Knicks. Every night, this has been an incredible playoff run. Every night has delivered highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and to win big. If you want to take my advice, and I feel like I have a pretty good track record with the NBA playoffs this year. I've been winning more than I lose. I am going to go, I know it burned you guys game 4. I'm going to go back into the well. I'm taking Knicks money line, backs against the wall. I do feel like they're going to force a game 6 at Madison Square Garden. All you got to do is bet $5 if you're new to FanDuel, and if you win that bet, you're going to get $200 back in bonus bets at FanDuel.com. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. We are continuing GOAT Week, and we start on the defensive side of the football. Today, we concluded offense yesterday, talking about the greatest tight ends in Eagles history and offensive linemen. Spoiler alert, the GOAT for the Eagles offensive line, he is still on the football team. That probably gives it away. But if not, go to YouTube, go to wherever you listen to the podcast, and check out those other 3 episodes this week as we continue discussing the greatest Eagles of all time. Today, we are talking about the defensive line. As most people expected, I had Reggie White as the GOAT on the edge, but I did have Brandon Graham now at number 2. Called it a career this offseason, 15 incredible years in Philly. Trent Cole, number 3. Clyde Simmons was number 4, and then I had Hugh Douglas at number 5. I do feel like edge rusher was easier to bring up a lot of names because there's just so many all-time great Eagles when it comes to getting to the quarterback at defensive end. When it comes to defensive tackle, I'm not going to lie, it was a little more difficult. I think Fletcher Cox is so, and I was surprised that it was so obvious, but it really is. Like, Fletcher Cox is clearly the GOAT, and it's not really close. He is by far the greatest defensive tackle in Eagles history. And I'm not going to lie, when you look at the lack of options at DT for this list, I had Jalen Carter on the list, and I do think there's going to come a point in a few years. He's only been in the league for 2 years, so I'm not going to get there yet. But with the way the NFL is treating this guy like an all-time great, the NFL with the way they double, triple team him, and all the attention goes to number 98 because they know he's such a game wrecker, they're treating him like a Fletcher Cox, a Reggie White, an Aaron Donald type of player. So Jalen Carter is on an all-time great pace. If he stays out of trouble, everything goes right, he stays healthy. If he continues to ascend, I think there's a chance he eventually jumps Fletcher Cox, and he already has a Super Bowl under his belt as the best player on your defense in that championship season. I think he personally made a top 5 play in franchise history. You know how I said Brandon Graham's strip sack on Brady was the best play in franchise history? Jalen Carter's sack on Matt Stafford in the divisional round against LA to win that game, that play saved your championship. If he does not get that sack, Matt Stafford is scoring that final drive, and the Eagles are losing that game, and this season would have ended in the divisional round. Their backs were that against the wall. I think that's a top 5 play of all time, because without that, I think a top 5 team in NFL history doesn't get to end their story with confetti. So Jalen Carter, I actually had on the list, and it's more of a projection. I'm putting him on the list based on, I'm projecting that he's going to continue to ascend and get better and better year after year. I really do believe he's going to become a, 2018 like prime Fletcher Cox. The teams every week are saying, we just can't let number 98 wreck this ball game like number 91 used to. They already are treating him like that. They treated him that way last year. His reputation's only going to get bigger and more attention driven after that championship season. So I think even Aaron Donald himself said that Jalen Carter reminds him of himself more than anybody. Like, if there's a next man up as an all-time great pass rusher on the interior, the GOAT himself, I think Aaron Donald's the greatest pass rushing defensive tackle in the history of the NFL. He himself said that Jalen Carter is likely to be that next guy. So I have Jalen Carter on the list at number 3. He is top 3. He would be on my Mount Rushmore already of Eagles defensive tackles, because when you look at other DTs in franchise history, none of them were really here that long. It's kind of a flash in the pan for everybody. So number 2, I did put the late, great Jerome Brown, because, he did pass away early. He passed away when he was an Eagle in the 90s in that accident. But if he did not pass away, if he played in Philadelphia for more than the 5 seasons he did, I do think he was on an all-time great pace. And, he was next to Reggie White, so a lot of the attention went to number 92. But Jerome Brown, 4 sacks. He was getting better every year. 4 sacks, then 5, then 10.5. He got hurt in 1990, but he came back in 91. He had 9 sacks. Like, he was ascending to be a game-wrecking interior pass rusher himself in the 90s on that all-time great defense. And then he was just taken too soon. So Jerome Brown, for me, like, I got to put him at number 2. Number 99 is retired at the link. Nobody will ever wear that number again. One of the funniest guys in franchise history. Like, watching those documentaries, I wish I could have watched him play, when he was alive, when he was in Kelly Green. So I'll put Jerome Brown number 2. Fletcher Cox is 1. I think that one's obvious. Like, he was an all-decade player. He was named to the 2010s all-decade team. Top 3 defensive tackle for the majority of his 11-season run. It was always him. I feel like it was him, Aaron Donald, and Chris Jones, right? Fletcher Cox was always a top 3 player at his position. 5th all-time in sacks for the Eagles. The number 1 defensive tackle in sacks. A Super Bowl champion. 2-time Super Bowl appearances. From 2015 to 2019, I'd argue, again, the only player at his position more unguardable, more dominant, was Aaron Donald. So Fletch is number 1. Like I said, Jerome Brown number 2, Jalen Carter number 3, and then to round out the list, I put Andy Harmon number 4 and Ken Clark number 5. 2 very consistent, underrated players in the 90s and the 80s. Ken Clark, actually, believe it or not, super interesting. He actually is 10th all-time in sacks for the Eagles, and he played nose tackle. So Ken Clark and Andy Harmon, I feel like, were really solid role players. Played longer than a lot of these other Eagles on the interior. Andy Harmon was a super consistent sack producer as well, as I mentioned, in the 90s. After Jerome Brown, Harmon was like that next guy to replace Brown as a pass rusher at DT. So Harmon's on that list. After that, it was all players that like had some good seasons, but they only played in Philadelphia for a few years. Like, I was already getting to like Javon Hargrave. I'm like, am I putting Javon Hargrave in here or Mike Patterson? Like, that's what the list was becoming. So I think those top 5, like after that, there was a pretty big drop off. It's Cox, Brown, Carter, Harmon, and Clark. And I'm telling you, give it, I don't know. It's only been 2 years, and Fletcher Cox was so good for a decade plus. So I'm not saying Jalen Carter next year, if he has like 11 sacks and the Eagles do go on another championship run, I'm still not going to put him ahead of ahead of Fletcher Cox. But I think when it's all said and done, if he continues this trajectory, Carter's going to be the GOAT. I think he can end up being one of the most dominant players in the history of the NFL if he continues to look like he did last year, and if he gets better and better. I mean, the NFL, like I said, they're already treating this guy like he's an all-time great first ballot Hall of Famer. And that's how, the best compliment to a player is when other players around him that are inferior talents start to get paid like they're that player they're playing next to. Like Jalen Carter, when you're getting guys paid all-time money, that's when you know you're becoming an all-time great. He got Milton Williams a bag. And I'll tell you what, if Moro Ujoma is the full-time starter next to Carter this year, Moro Ujoma in a couple years is going to get a bag as well. So that tells you all you need to know about number 98. He commands that much attention that players around him thrive. Like he's a non-quarterback that elevates to such a high level. When you talk about players that aren't quarterbacks that elevate their teammates, Jalen Carter is atop that list of players that elevate their teammates more than anybody in the league. So Carter's number 3 right now, and soon I'd put him at number 2, and eventually I think I'm going to end up putting him at number 1. If knock on wood, all things continue and, in the positive direction like they have in 2023 and in 2024. All right, guys, we'll wrap up this Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles coming up next with some OTA takeaways in the secondary. Vic Fangio trying some stuff out that I want to talk about. I'll tell you what that is coming up right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. We are wrapping up this Thursday edition of the show. Continuing on with GOAT Week, we did defensive end and defensive tackle today. Tomorrow, we're going to do linebacker, and we actually might do linebacker. We might wrap it up tomorrow. We might go, tomorrow's Friday. Yep, we're doing linebacker, corner, and safety, and then that'll be GOAT Week. So thanks so much for tuning in all 5 days, Monday through Friday. OTAs continue at the NovaCare Complex, and Vic Fangio is making some interesting decisions early on when it comes to his depth chart in the secondary. And again, I'm not one to really read too much into things in OTAs, really even early on in training camp. I take things with a grain of salt. Like last year, for instance, like if you're freaking out about, let's say, Adoree Jackson playing over Kelee Ringo right now with first team reps, or Cooper DeJean getting outside snaps, I do have some interesting thoughts about those decisions. And I do think those aren't things you should completely overlook. But I wouldn't also say the sky is falling if you want like Ringo to break out this year. If you don't want Cooper DeJean to play on the boundary, take it with a grain of salt, because last summer, all of training camp and all of the preseason, Quinyon Mitchell was the starting slot corner. Like he played in the slot almost 100% of the time in training camp with the ones. In the preseason, he only played outside corner in base packages when they only had 2 corners on the field, which is very rare. The Eagles use 3 corners 99% of the time, which is part of why I'm not, taking the DeJean on the outside reps too seriously, because the Eagles are using 3 corners. Nickel is their base defense. So I think DeJean will play as the outside corner in 2 cornerback sets, but they very rarely do that. So I'm not reading too much into that. And like I said, Q was in the slot all year, all offseason, I should say. And then all year, he was your number 1 boundary corner. So take it with a grain of salt. But I will say, the Cooper DeJean to the outside, that one I'm not reading that much into. But the Adoree Jackson over Kelee Ringo thing, that I am adding some weight to. Because when you combine that with the fact that last year Kelee Ringo could not beat out Isaiah Rodgers as that 4th cornerback that would come in a lot of the times when Darius Slay would get injured, which was very consistent. It was almost a weekly occurrence. Isaiah Rodgers played a lot for the Eagles last year, and it helped him get paid and I think earn a starting job as a corner with the Minnesota Vikings. Last year Fangio didn't love Ringo, and now this year they brought in an aging cornerback in Adoree Jackson, who he has a lot of starts under his belt, but I think his best days are behind him. He's totally lost a step. Like, he used to be one of the fastest corners in football. I don't think he's that guy anymore. And yet he's taking the majority of first-team reps over Kelee, who's been here now this is his 3rd season in Philadelphia, a player the Eagles traded a future 3rd-round pick to move up for, a player I think Howie Roseman didn't bring back Darius Slay and Isaiah Rodgers because he wanted to see this investment through. It's 1 week of practice in OTAs in May. But the fact that Adoree Jackson, a new player, veteran or not, he's a new player that's new to the system, and Kelee Ringo is not. The fact that Jackson is getting more reps than Ringo as a first-team corner, that is definitely noteworthy to me. And do I agree with it? No. I think Ringo should get a chance to be that first corner, starting on the outside opposite Quinyon Mitchell. I think I want to give him time and patience and let him develop. But Fangio looks for certain things in his defense, and if he doesn't trust Ringo, he's not going to play him. Last year, he did not trust Bryce Huff, and Bryce Huff did not play. He did not trust Sidney Brown, and Sidney Brown really did not play much. So if that's the case with Ringo as well, Adoree Jackson's going to be the guy. That would be a disappointing outcome for me. But Fangio, again, he'll tell you up front how he feels. And I'm very curious when he has his first press conference. I would definitely, if I was at that media day, I would definitely be asking questions about Kelee Ringo. But the DeJean to the outside stuff, again, that I wouldn't take into consideration or take as seriously as the Jackson playing over Ringo. Because again, DeJean is going to be on the field all the time. Last year, he was not a base cornerback. When there were only 2 corners on the field, let's say they're running 3 safeties. Let's say there's a time this year they want all 3 of Zach Bond, Jihad Campbell, and Kobe Dean out on the field when they're healthy. Yeah, this time it's not going to be Darius Slay and Quinyon Mitchell. It's going to be Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell. So that's what they were doing. They're getting him ready to play base outside corner. But 99% of the time, nickel is their base defense. So Cooper, to me, is going to play in the nickel when they're using 3 corners. Because although he has a high floor, he can be a very good outside cornerback. He did it at Iowa. He played mostly boundary cornerback for the Hawkeyes. He can be good there. And if Ringo and Jackson both suck, like DeJean can be that guy in an emergency, but his ceiling, his star ability, his star potential that he showed last year as a Rookie of the Year finalist, that player is inside. Like his potential is at inside corner. And if they're going to use him differently this year and not just play him as a nickel corner, if they want to use him as like a hybrid safety box type of DB, I would rather do that and use him differently in more specific matchups across the formation than say, let's actually start to use him more at outside corner. Like I don't agree with that approach. Now, somebody did suggest to us on the squad show earlier today that maybe they want to do DeJean on the outside with Andrew Makuba in the slot and have Sidney Brown play deep. But I'd rather have Makuba deep with Ringo and DeJean out there. I'd rather have Ringo on the field than Sidney Brown. We'll see. Maybe Fangio likes Brown better and he thinks Makuba can play the slot, and that's the better combination of players. But I'm higher on Kelee Ringo maybe than Vic Fangio, and we'll see what happens. Again, not trying to overreact to this. It's only been 3 days of OTAs. There's a lot of time for Ringo to win this job, to earn the starting job. He is, I still think, the favorite to win it, despite Jackson getting more reps right now on the outside. But it is something to take into consideration when you also look back at last year and the fact that Ringo, after playing a lot at the end of 2023, he could not beat out Isaiah Rodgers. That is, I think, a lot more noteworthy than Cooper DeJean potentially being a full-time boundary cornerback. Again, the only scenario that happens where he's playing opposite Quinyon Mitchell on the outside, it's if Ringo and Jackson are just terrible. And that may be possible. Like, Kelee Ringo is not a sure thing. He's a high floor or high ceiling player, but a low floor player. Adoree Jackson's an old corner that's got a lot of miles on the tires. So it's a possible outcome. But for me, the thing I'm watching more is just who wins that battle outright between Ringo and Jackson, because I think the Eagles they don't want to need DeJean to play on the outside. I think they want to play him still in the slot in 2025. DeJean playing in the slot last year, replacing Avonte Maddox, completely turned around the season. You know, after the bye week, of course, giving the ball to Saquon more than anybody in football helped you win a championship, but the move on defense that helped you become a number 1 ranked defense overall, that big move you made was replacing Maddox with DeJean on the inside. So if it isn't broken, don't fix it. Like, I don't want to move him from that spot, but we'll see. We'll continue to follow OTAs and training camp each and every day right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. We're going to sign off for now. We'll continue GOAT Week tomorrow with linebacker, safety, and corner. So until then, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.